Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. Probably a shorter one today, but this morning we'll be in Psalm 142, verses 1 through 7. To the Lord I cry out. To the Lord I plead for mercy. I pour out my lament before him. I tell him about my troubles. Even when my strength leaves me, you watch my footsteps. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see. No one cares about me. I have nowhere to run. No one is concerned about my life. I cry out to you, O Lord. I say, you are my shelter, my security in the land of the living. Listen to my cry for help. I am in serious trouble. Rescue me from those who chase me, for they are stronger than I am. Free me from prison, that I may give thanks to your name. Because of me, the godly will assemble, for you will vindicate me. Psalmist is in trouble, and he cries out to the Lord for his help. No living person on earth is concerned about his life, but he has faith that the Lord will help him, and so much so that the godly will assemble and give thanks to God's name because of his vindication of the psalmist. From Guzik here. Psalm 142 is titled A Contemplation of David, a prayer when he was in the cave. The Hebrew word for contemplation, maskil, could be better translated as instruction. He calls this prayer maskil, a psalm of instruction, because of the good lessons he had himself learned in the cave, learned on his knees, and so learned that he desired to teach others, from Matthew Henry. The cave was probably Adullam cave, mentioned in 1 Samuel 22, verse 1, though the caves of En-Gedi are also a possibility. Adullam seems to be the best fit, which would suggest that Psalm 34 and 57 are also associated with this period of David's life. There are two notes running side by side throughout the song. The first is that of this terrible sense of helplessness and hopelessness, so far as man is concerned. The other is that of the determined application of the helpless soul to Jehovah, from G. Campbell Morgan. I cry out to the Lord. This was more than David's appeal for help. It was also his declaration of allegiance to Yahweh, the God of Israel. David knew about the pagan gods worshipped by the surrounding Gentiles, but he determined that he would never cry out to them, only to the Lord. Trouble and lack of human sympathy or help have done their best work on him, since they have driven him to God's breast. He has cried in vain to man, and now he has gathered himself up in a firm resolve to cast himself upon God. From Maclaren. Caves make good closets for prayer. Their gloom and solitude are helpful to the exercise of devotion. Had David prayed as much in his palace as he did in his cave, he might never have fallen into the act which brought such misery upon him in his latter days. From Spurgeon. With my voice to the Lord. As a man of deep spiritual experience, David knew that there were many ways to cry out to the Lord, in thought, in feeling, in action. Here David cried out to God with his voice, feeling that silent feelings were not enough for his present need. David, like Bartimaeus in the Gospels, knows the value of refusing to relapse into silence. That way lies despair. From Kidner. The state of David in the cave of Adullam was a state of utter destitution, persecuted by his own countrymen, dismissed by Achish, and not yet joined by his own relations or any other attendants. He took refuge in the cave, and was there alone. From Horn. I pour out my complaint before him. David had a complaint to bring before God, as the psalm develops. David asks for God's help in the face of enemies who hoped to trap him. So this complaint is likely against his enemies. Whatever the source, David did the right thing with his complaint. He brought it before the Lord. My complaint is not as petulant a word as in English, but might be rendered my troubled thoughts. From Kidner. The outpouring of complaint is not meant to tell Jehovah what he does not know. It is for the complainer's relief, not for God's information. From Maclaren. I pour out. Those words teach us that in prayer We should not try to keep anything back from God, but should show him all that is on our hearts, and that in his presence, in our closet, with the door shut, but not before men. From Neil and Littledale. I declare before him my trouble. David had the heart later expressed by the Apostle Paul in Philippians 4:6. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. David had no provisions, no followers, and no place to turn. David then went to Gath, the Philistine city, but this proved to be both dangerous and unworkable. And David eventually escaped into the wilderness again and hid in the cave of Adullam from Boise. It is not merely words that you have to utter. You have to lay all your troubles before God. As a child tells its mother its griefs, tell the Lord all your griefs, your complaints, your miseries, your fears. Tell them all out, and great relief will come to your spirit. From Spurgeon. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path. Anytime David felt overwhelmed, he found confidence in knowing that God knew his journey and his walk. God knows our path and our walk, and all of its good and all of its bad. Overwhelmed, David was a hero, and yet his spirit sank. He could smite a giant down, but he could not keep himself up. He did not know his own path, nor feel able to bear his own burden. From Spurgeon. You knew my path. Then it is an infinite solace to look up into the face of the Father and say, before I was born, or took the first steps on this path, or essayed to meet its manifold vicissitudes, thou knewest it, and thou must have known that it was not too hard, and that there were resources of strength in thyself sufficient for my day, which the emergency would bring out in a clearer manifestation. From Mayor. Yeah, I think that's a good thing for us to remember, that even when things are difficult or not necessarily clear, God knows everything. God knew us before we were born. So it's important to turn to him, the author and perfecter of our faith. They have secretly set a snare for me. David didn't know where the snares were, but he knew they were out there. David also knew that as he depended upon him, God could preserve him from secret snares. The use of concealed traps is disgraceful to our enemies, but they care little what tricks they resort to for their evil purposes. Wicked men must find some exercise for their malice, and therefore, when they dare not openly assail, they will privately ensnare. From Spurgeon. There is no one who acknowledges me, no one cares for my soul. David felt alone and forsaken, yet this very cry to God declares that David knew that even if he were forsaken by men, God had not forsaken him. Even if every other refuge has failed, David found in God an ear for the voice of his cry. Look on my right hand and see. The right hand is the place for a champion or helper, but this lonely sufferer is unguarded, and there is none who know him in the sense of recognizing him as one to be helped. From Maclaren. The right signifies the place where one's witness or legal counsel stood. He has no one to defend him against the adversaries. From Van Gemeren. We have companions in joy, sorrow we have to face by ourselves. Unless we have Jesus with us in the darkness, we have no one. From Maclaren. In the event, it seems that God answered abundantly, soon sending David's brothers and all his father's house to join him in his cave, and then by degrees a company that would become the nucleus of his kingdom. This low ebb in his fortunes proved in fact to be a turning point. From Kidner. That's a good point. This was a rallying place for David, and a place where he eventually developed strength from. No one cares for my soul. When danger besetteth us around, and fear is on every side, let us follow the example of David, and that of a greater than David, who, when Jews and Gentiles conspired against him, and he was left all alone, in the garden and on the cross, gave himself unto prayer. From Horn. You are my refuge. Among men, David had no refuge. Yet, as he cried out to God, David could confidently proclaim that God was indeed his refuge. The cities of refuge were, in Old Testament times, for the protection of an Israelite in special circumstances. And David found his place of refuge, not in a place or in a particular circumstance, but in the Lord himself. I said, if David had not cried, he would not have said, and if the Lord had not been his refuge, he would never have been his portion. The lower step is as needful as the higher, from Spurgeon. My portion in the land of the living. Many times in David's seasons as a fugitive, he had reason to believe that all his inheritance in the world was gone. In such times, he had the confidence that God himself was his portion, his inheritance. David also knew that he would benefit from this portion in the land of the living, in the here and now, not only in the age to come. My portion. To say my portion goes as far beyond this as love goes beyond fear. The Good News Bible brings out the great force of this word by the phrase, you are all I want, from Kidner. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. David once again brought his cry to the Lord, honestly confessing his low circumstances. David didn't feel a need to pretend that everything was fine or that he wasn't weak. He could come to God for help even when brought very low by persecutors who were stronger than him. The song ends with an earnest cry for deliverance and an affirmation of confidence that the cry will be heard and answered, from Morgan. They are stronger than I. This means that David well understood his present weakness. The one who killed Goliath felt himself to be very weak, and actually, that was a good place for David to be in. God's strength would soon flood his life. You always hear about Jacob's wrestling. Well, I dare say he did, but it was not Jacob who was the principal wrestler. The wrestling was to take all his strength out of him, and when his strength was gone, then God called him a prince. Now David was to be king over all Israel. What was the way to Jerusalem for David? What was the way to the throne? Well, it was round by the cave of Adullam, from Spurgeon. Bring my soul out of prison. This was likely a figure of speech, yet David felt constrained and bound in his soul. He longed to be free from this sense, so that he could praise God's name. My soul is frequently a longer way of saying me, from Kidner. Prison may denote actual imprisonment, but may also be a metaphor for his desperate condition in the light of the allusions to adversity and isolation, from Van Gemeren. That I may praise your name. Though his cry came from a great sense of humility and weakness, David ended this psalm with great confidence. David began the song with complaint. He closes confident of praise to come. David began the song with a great sense of isolation. He closes with confidence in coming companionship, and support from the righteous. David began with the sense of being low and weak. He closes confident in God's future goodness, knowing that God would deal bountifully with him. The prayer of David was heard and answered. He was delivered from his persecutors, enlarged from his distress, exalted to the throne, and joined by all the tribes of Israel, from Horn. And I think this is partially due to the fact that he remembers who God is, that he is a good father, and doesn't abandon us in our time of need. In spite of all the opposition of men, he realized that his God would deal bountifully with him. Therefore, instead of his foes, he would find himself surrounded by the righteous, from Morgan. The righteous shall surround me. In Hebrew, shall crown me, that is, shall encircle me, as wondering at thy goodness and my deliverance, or they shall set the crown on mine head, from Trap. Perhaps when he wrote the song, he already began to realize that the crowd of men in debt, in danger, and discontented who were coming to him would presently bring him into his kingdom, from Morgan. That's some foresight there, then, because men are often unreliable, but ultimately God is faithful. Carrying on, Proverbs 17, verses 24 and 25. Wisdom is directly in front of the discerning person, but the eyes of a fool run to the ends of the earth. A foolish child is a grief to his father, and bitterness to the mother who bore him. Wisdom is directly in front of the discerning person. Just thinking through that, of the Proverbs also say that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. The wise person keeps God directly in his view, not running to the right or to the left or fleeing from him. But the eyes of a fool run to the ends of the earth, in looking for something that will help them as much as wisdom. They run to the ends of the earth. But ultimately, there is no help beyond God, because any help that man might provide is temporary. From Guzik, wisdom is in the sight of him who has understanding. The sense seems to be that the wise sees things in the light of their wisdom. Their wisdom makes everything else clearer and able to be understood. But the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth. The fool doesn't see things with the eyes of wisdom. They have their eyes everywhere, except where they should be. Wisdom is within the sight and reach of every man. But he whose desires are scattered abroad, who is always aiming at impossible things, or is of an unsteady disposition, is not likely to find it. In James, it says that if anyone lacks wisdom, he should ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, being driven and tossed by the wind. Let not that man think that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. It's important for us to ask in faith to God, and to actually ask God rather than to seek out wisdom from earthly things. Because ultimately, Job 28 poses this question of where can wisdom be found? Where's a reliable mine for wisdom? Where is it in heaven above or in the earth beneath? Is it in the seas? Abaddon and death have a whisper of it, but ultimately God understands its way and he knows its place. He saw it and declared it to man that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. And as long as the fool rejects God, he can by no means get wisdom. The contrast here is between before the face of him and the ends of the earth. While it is a sure sign of weakness to see only the things that are near, it is a yet surer sign of folly to be forever looking at far-off things, to the neglect of these close at hand. For Morgan. Yeah. As a student who is hearing nothing of what his teacher says might let his eyes rove to every corner of the classroom, so the fool who is inattentive to the instruction of wisdom is said to have his eyes on the ends of the earth. From McCain. His eyes are on the ends of the earth, rolling and wandering from one object to another. His thoughts are scattered. He has no definite objective, no certain way of life. Talent, cultivation of mind, and improvement of opportunity are all frittered away. He cares about those things that are furthest from him, and with which he has the least concern. From Bridges. Yeah. Maybe this is also an admonition to us to have our eyes set firmly in front of us and not to have them scattered abroad, wasted on things that we have no business looking at. This diversion is a great friend to the enemy. Our enemy's great object is to turn the mind away from what is immediate to what is indefinite, from what is plain and important to what is unsearchable, from what is personal to what is irrelevant. Many trifles take the place of the one thing that is needful, from Bridges. Yeah, and I pray today that God would lead our minds to the most important thing, that is ultimately to Him. A foolish son is a grief to his father. The thought in this proverb is similar to that in Proverbs 17:21. He that begetteth a fool doeth it to his sorrow, and the father of a fool hath no joy. Parents may find great grief in the foolish character of their children, and bitterness to her who bore him. Because of the maternal instinct and bond, there's a special pain and bitterness that belongs to the mother of a foolish son or daughter. Yeah. But ultimately, God loves the child more than even the parents do. He knows what can bring even the fool back. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.